Hi, everyone. It's Larry Kotlikoff back with Economics Matters, the podcast. I'm delighted to have today with us George Kinder. George and I really have kind of gone through life passing each other somehow, not really connected, but today we're connecting initially and for the rest of our days, I'm sure. George is internationally recognized as the father of the life planning movement. So he's into personal finance in a big way, but he's into personal finance from the angle of philosophy, and he's going to tell us all about his way of thinking about the bigger questions that we have to confront when it comes to our personal finances, and that those questions need to be addressed before we really can think about what to do for our own personal economies. So, George, let me tell you a little bit about George. Then I'm going to do what I do with all the guests on Economics Matters, the podcast, which is have the guest kind of fill in the whole bio, starting at birth and where that happened and how they got to do what they do. So George went to Harvard. We actually were about 2 years apart. He was an undergrad. He graduated in 1971. I got to grad school at Harvard in 73. But he's, after leaving Harvard, he spends the next 35 years revolutionizing financial advice. And he does it not by talking so much directly to households, but to financial planners. He's trained over 4,000 financial planners, not just in the US, but in 30 countries around the world. And he's trained them in this methodology and philosophy of financial life planning. He founded the Kinder Institute of Life Planning in 2003. And he's been working as a practicing financial planner and tax advisor thereafter. He's written a lot of books, I guess 4 or 5. I'll just give you some of the names. Reflections on Spectacle Pond, a weekly edition. It's available as a free email subscription. And it's inspired by 30 years he spent on the edge of a small New England pond. So he's like Henry Thoreau, and he kind of looks a little bit like Henry Thoreau. Anybody mention that, George?
Right, yeah, no, that's the first, Larry. That's great. I don't mind.
Maybe, I'm just remembering kind of from some picture of Thoreau, but he's written seven books. He's written one on mindfulness, transforming suffering into wisdom. Another book on photography and poetry called A Song for Hannah. And then when it comes to about financial freedom, he's written A Golden Civilization and the Map of Mindfulness. Well, I guess that's about freedom in general. But then there's books about money, 7 Stages of Money Maturity, Lighting the Torch, and Life Planning for You. These are three books on personal finances. And he also has I guess the book, The 7 Stages of Money Maturity, not a guess, but I know was featured by the Wall Street Journal. So these have been really important books. He was named as one of the 35 most influential people in financial services by the, I forget who actually, this might have been the Financial Planning Association. He won their Heart of Financial Planning Award, which recognizes individuals who demonstrate commitment and passion in doing extraordinary work to contribute or give back to the financial planning community and or the public. So, and then he's been on all kinds of media, the FT, he's been featured there, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, Time Magazine, FP Today, Journal of Financial Planning, New York Times, you name it. So let's see, he's spoken pretty much to all the top players in terms of the Wall Street, Merrill Lynch, Smith Barney, when they were still around, Fidelity, Charles Schwab, AXA, and then he's talked to financial planning organizations and spoke on numerous occasions, and also at universities like Harvard and Boston College. So I could go on, but I think it's better to hear from George. And let's start with you, George, filling in your bio. So let's start from where you were born and how you ended up on your golden pond, but not just there. Just, you weren't like Thoreau, and I guess what was the name of his
Well,
retreat, his community society?
Walden was
That
Walden
well,
was
those, yeah, and then there's Harvard Mass
yeah,
Truth, right? Is
yeah.
where the commune was, and that went on for about 3 years. But you've been on for like 35 years. So just to start us off, where did all this begin? Where were you born?
First, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here with you, Larry. As Larry said, we've passed like ships in the night for many, obviously since Harvard, 50 years, and so it's great finally to connect. And I came from rural background. I was born in a small town in Ohio on the West Virginia border. I was born in Wheeling, West Virginia, and then lived in this small rural town. But my parents were, and with three brothers and a couple of parents who were well educated, and their value was education. So they found a way. The school system there was not ranked very high at all, and they found a way to send me off to one of these East Coast prep schools, to Exeter. And at Exeter, I struggled like all get out in a lot of the subjects because of the background that I'd had, I think. But I excelled in mathematics and was a pretty decent athlete as well. And that got me into Harvard somehow. And at Harvard, then what was interesting was I minored in economics, and it went like this. I got to Harvard as a math major because my scores were off the charts every time I took those tests. But I was kind of bored at that point with mathematics. And so my father-in-law at that time was a well-known economist at Yale, and he influenced me, and I thought, oh, I'll go try economics. And then you'll be amused by this. You might have known the person who did it, but I got laughed out of the economics department in '68 or so for writing a paper arguing that the 1970s would see a very significant increase in inflation. And everybody thought I just had too wild imagination. So I didn't take to that too much. So I shifted to some topics that had imagination in them, at least where you were allowed to have imagination at college. And I shifted to the history of art and then on to English literature. And it was interesting. I'm sure you were strong in mathematics as well. And what was interesting to me was when I got to English literature, realizing how complex, but how wondrous the mathematics of language is, and the language and great language of poetry and great literature. So that was kind of the beginning. And then as I left Harvard, I'd been accepted at some graduate schools, I think including Harvard in English literature, but I didn't want to do all the work that it required. I just wanted to write and paint and also have a deep life like Thoreau on Walden Pond. And so I turned down the graduate schools and I went off, and my wife and I had this deal where she worked for a couple of years and I did what I wanted, and then I worked for a couple of years and she did what she wanted. The unfortunate thing was that even after all that preparation, I couldn't find anyone to give me a dime for one of my poems or for one of my meditations. So I had to go back and make a living. And what I was skilled at was basically mathematics, and I had some skills in economics. So I went and studied accounting in graduate school and won the bronze medal on the CPA exam in Massachusetts, and went and put leaflets on cars around Cambridge and got, professor types like yourself to come in and become my clients. Just they found the leaflet on their car through blizzards and everything.
So that's very interesting. You went from, kind of more, theoretical and ephemeral, let's say, or or I'm not sure what the right description of English would be, but a little less grounded, to something very concrete. And that didn't cause any psychological. So at some point you really wanted to help people and you wanted to get closer to people. And this was the avenue, I think, right?
Well, that's an interesting thing, and interesting suggestion and a line of thought, Larry. That I think that when you are a financial advisor of any kind, a tax advisor, whatever, there is that personal relationship that you thrive on, and you might not think it when you go into it because you think it's mathematical and all this, but it's you're one-on-one with somebody. It's an intimate relationship, really, and so I did love that. It wasn't the reason. I was purely mercenary. I wanted to write and paint and do these wonderful, spiritual and imaginative things, but I couldn't pay my bills. So I tax returns were an amazing thing because I could do them 2 or 3 months out of the year, and then I'd have the rest of the year free. So that was the idea. But I was good at it, as you might imagine, and build a business out of it, and that changed things just a bit. Yeah.
I think that's a great, insight for everybody who's younger, that if you really want to do X, the path may be to do Y. Right?
Yeah, yeah. And it was interesting. I really enjoyed the precision of tax returns and but I still wanted to be free. So I wanted to be free to do whatever I wanted to do. And so as you might imagine, as a budding financial planner underneath it all, I was structuring all these ways that I could get free, should I move to Costa Rica? Can I sell my tax practice? Those kind of things. And I realized that the best way to kind of gather that kind of knowledge at that time, and this was at the end of the 70s or so, was to become a certified financial planner. Well, there weren't that many of them around then, and they covered pretty much all the different things in financial services. So I did that, and all in the design of how can I get free. And then clients would come in, and I'd realize that they were not that happy with what their lives were doing for them. And I realized that many of them were struggling with this issue of how do they get free. And that sent me off to a conference. It was one of the first conferences, maybe the first conference that NAPFA ever did. And there was a course there on goals and goal setting.
Can you just explain what NAPFA is, just so you...
Yeah, sure. Okay, so NAPFA is it's an organization that Larry and I have flitted around in various ways, probably throughout our careers. It was the kind of the radical, visionary financial planning organization in the early 80s. It began in 81, 82, 83, something like that. And they were radical because most of the financial planning community came out of the brokerage world, or came out of insurance world, or possibly came out of legal. So they came out of, and often sales, almost always sales. And NAPFA was fierce. No, we're not going to sell anything. We're not going to take commissions. And there wasn't a tax practice back in those days. You'll remember you couldn't sell anything if you were an accountant. You had to just be what they called a professional. So I thought, well, NAPFA would be the way to go. Wow, that's cool. And so I went off to this thing where there were barely 50 or 60 people, just the beginning of NAPFA. And the course on goals made me refine what it was that I wanted to do, but mainly it gave me something where I thought, geez, I could help all these tax clients. I got 1,000 tax clients now. Half of them, believe it or not, were in the counseling, were therapists. You know how Cambridge is filled with the psychological world. I had a lot of professors, but a huge number of therapists because I was so long-haired and out there. So I started introducing these goal exercises to people and trying to figure out how they could get free. And that really was the very beginning of the financial planning endeavor for me. And then I built a business out of it. I loved money management. I loved portfolio construction, and studied it some and thought I was pretty good at it. And I learned otherwise at times because I thought I could beat the market in the early days back in those, and then I realized no, there's more refined ways of doing this, and I went back to economics, and so that was really interesting, and it was all wonderful. But I still wanted to be free in this other way.
So let me just hit you with a few questions I
Yeah.
came up with in the context of looking through your bios from in different places, and so here you are. Well, let's start with your first book, The 7 Stages of Money, and that it maintains that every financial decision entails or should entail an awakening. So can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah. Well, that's really a very profound statement and ideal. And I wouldn't be surprised if it's in. I haven't reread the book in 20 years probably, but the main thought of the book, it included awakening, included money. What it was mainly about in terms of leading to awakening was that our lives are really about growth, internal growth in one way or another. We become better parents. We become parents if we do, and we become better at it. We become better at our relationships, hopefully. We deepen in some ways, and so I was having these, half my clients, as I said, were therapists. I went to their, believe it or not, I went to their CEU programs, their continuing education programs. So I would fly down to Philadelphia and study with a great person on group therapy. And I would learn what she had to say. And I would go to San Francisco for somebody else. And so I would do all this so I'd be a better tax advisor to my clients. So I'm trying to walk in their shoes and really understand who they are and what their deductions were. But as a consequence, I got pretty good at all that stuff. And so the book, it's called The 7 Stages of Money Maturity. And the last word, maturity, I often use as a synonym, it's not quite, but for awakening. And there's an interflow of Buddhism or of meditation or of mindfulness in the book. But the book is really about how do we encounter money? We get so greedy around money, we get so fearful around it. How do we encounter money in a way that is clear without having to go through the economics courses that you took or that I took a little bit of at Harvard? How do we get to a place where we're clear about money and at ease and are making good decisions? And I called that, and I went through emotional stages around that, and I called that a vision and then awakening was what I called that. And if we can, every decision would be wonderful. But yeah.
So I want to kind of try and pin you down a little bit more on that. So that's kind of broad, but how would you take somebody who's maybe just retired and hasn't done a good job preparing, and but has decided, I deserve to be retired at this age. Maybe I'm 62. I desire to take my Social Security right now at 62, even though it'll be 76% higher adjusted for inflation if you wait. I'm going to make a killing on the market, so I'm going to leave my money in the IRA. I know it's going to do well because stocks always do well in the long run. But that they're in trouble, that they're basically not going to be able to sustain themselves through. I mean, if they're financially unlucky enough to make it to 100, they're going to be in terrible financial trouble. How do you get to that person, or how do you understand that person, and how do you kind of counsel that person into maybe changing the entire mindset actually going back to work, or what do you do?
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be that they cut their expenses dramatically. So you've got that range of possibilities there that are real. And what I do, I start with who they really want to be. I mean, what you've described are their strategies for being somebody other than the worker that they've been. So their strategy is this wild investment strategy, and the structure of their IRA and all of that, and taking their Social Security early. So if they've already made some of those commitments, then some of those are going to need to be, if they can be, unwound and turned in different directions. But what I want to do first off is, if I come across like that, very often they're likely to be reactive, and it's like I'm playing a parental role with them right in that place, telling them they did wrong. I'm the authority and they're the rookie on this. And so it's not for that reason, but what I want to do before anything is I think really great money advice is based not only in the kind of skills that you and I have spent a lifetime developing, but it's also based on a real authenticity of relationship between the advisor and the client. So if we're in a culture where financial advisors are not trustworthy, in fact, and are not trusted. And we're in a culture that goes far beyond that right now, as we've seen this enormous polarization in the culture. Nothing's trustworthy. And so the thing that I do first is I establish a trustworthy relationship where practiced listening respectfully, listening with empathy, and listening with excitement, where they're excited. But I want to find out why they want to do this. What do they want to do at 62? What is it really about? And so we ask these layered questions, starting off with, hey, you have all the money you need for the rest of your life, but going to deeper questions, life and death questions, legacy questions.
So you have these three questions. One is, because I was watching one of your videos, and I encourage everybody to go to Google George Kinder and look at, or georgekinder.com, and there's a whole set of really cool videos where it kind of just changes your mindset. The first, George starts out in the very first video that's posted there asking, what if you had all the money you needed? You don't need another penny. You're perfectly safe, fully secure, and you knew exactly when you were going to die, and you had, let's say, 10 or 20 years left to go. What would you do? What would you want to do? And then you have a second question. Maybe you want to tell us the other two questions.
Yeah, well, the first one, you could go on forever. I mean, it's just, in other words, it's given not only to people who are near retirement, but I give it to teenagers sometimes. If they're mature enough, they can handle them, and some interesting stuff comes out of it. But the second, so the first one's, you win the lottery basically, but maybe you're not going to be as rich as the person who just won Mega Millions, but you got enough. You got enough. And the second one is you only have 5 to 10 years left to live. And so obviously that's more tender place. You can't lead with that. You have to lead with the fun and the money and all that. So the second one, 5 to 10 years left to live. Well, and you don't know when. You don't know when you're going to die. Some after 5, but before 10. Now what would you do? What would you do with your life? And this time, and almost always you get the question, well, do I still have all the money that I need? And I said, well, let's make this poignant. You just have what you have right now. And then so that gets more personal. There's often more relationship stuff that comes up, more legacy things. But the final one is the one that we go to that is the most profound, and you never could ask it first, which is, now you go to the doctor, and this time he or she says to you, I'm terribly sorry, I'm misdiagnosed, but you have a very rare ailment. There's nothing we can do about it, and you're at the final stage. You have 24 hours left to live. And the question is not, what would you do at that time? Go out on your bender or whatever you do. It's not that. It's, what did you miss? Thinking about the things that you had anticipated doing or being or becoming. What did you miss? Who did you not get to be? What did you not get to do? And that question really touches people deeply. Occasionally, there's 5 or 10% of the people that go, that's a little too personal. Let's just hang out with the 5 to 10 year one. But most of the time, people go to it and they discover things that they've really, really, really wanted to accomplish in their life, and they haven't. And it isn't in those other 2 questions. And they go, oh my God, I forgot to have the kid. It's like, whatever it is. And that's where we want to be for the financial plan.
And is it, I forgot to help somebody, or I want to help? Now that, maybe you want to give an example, or so somebody who transformed their thinking just from those 3 questions, because they are very profound and they do shake you up. When you're coming to talk to a financial planner, he's asking you something that you do not expect to hear from a financial planner. You expect to hear, how to invest how much to put into stocks versus bonds, but not these kinds of questions and they do involve all these issues about how do you want to spend your money, whether you want to keep working, when do you want to retire, and you really can't answer those other questions until you get to these questions. You're absolutely right. That's a brilliant insight. I've never heard, and I've been in this area for quite a while, as you know, when I listened to your podcast or your video, wow, this is really important.
Yeah, cool.
But maybe you have an example or 2 about somebody who reacted strongly or not.
Cool.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so I will say a generality, and then I'll give you an example or 2. That these are the deepest questions. They're legacy questions, deep legacy questions, and overwhelmingly, I don't know how to say this exactly, but the number one answer that comes up, not for everybody, but for a significant majority of people, is family or relationship. So your thought about helping people is spot on, Larry, and that's kind of the number one response. But the second response is really interesting. It's values based. It may be spiritual, it may be meditative, it may be mindfulness, it may be church related, synagogue related, or it may be just, lived all my life as a salesperson. I just would like to have been able to be more honest or more close to my own truth as I spoke to people. And that's incredible. That's an incredible revelation that you then build a financial plan around. How would you do that? What would you do? So that's the second most common one. The third most common one is creativity. Boy, I'd love to play jazz saxophone on Wednesday nights in the club, and or I'd love to write the great American novel, or these days it's I'd like to act in independent film, or I'd like to be on TikTok, a star on TikTok. But so it's creative, but it could be creative with your business as well. You're incredibly creative. You're a model for us in many ways, Larry, but you're incredibly creative around financial planning, and that's probably one of your passions, but so it can be around your profession as well. The fourth most common one is community. It's the one we're trained in as financial planners, the philanthropy idea, you give back. And the fifth most common one has to do with the environment in some way, not necessarily the earth, but it could be that large. Or it could be, I live in the city all my life, I really want a place in the country, or vice versa. And so it's really feeling one's place in the world and one's relationship to the world in that way. So those are the 5. Now, I could give you a story from any one of them, but a classic one from the kid's standpoint of a family would be one of the things that got revealed. Maybe it was in their first question. We also ask a couple of other inspiring questions and exercises, give exercises. And it might have been in what would your ideal day look like? And the person said, I'd get home at 3 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock, and I'd walk my kid home from school. And boy, I'm about to hit a home run here, because in the financial plan, that's going to be in there on every Friday. This person's going to get home and walk their kid home from school. And suddenly I'm in a relationship where they go, you get me. You really get me. And it's not, as you know, it's not that big a sacrifice to do that. You can make that happen. So that's the kind of thing. It could happen in any one of those. And it's usually the person needs more time, even more than they need more money. And then what we do is it's this balancing act, like the person you're talking about retiring at 62 and taking their Social Security. Boy, how do we remedy that when their finances are really a challenge? And how do we find what they're so passionate about? The thing about discovering their passions is that the client puts a lot of energy in. Otherwise, it's just about the money. And if I can get them to put energy into solving the problem of who they want to be, then the money won't be as much of a problem. It's just almost guaranteed. I've had people who've shifted from a 5-day week to a 4-day week, and they get more done in the 4-day week because in that 5th day, they're doing what they really want to do. So,
the Fruitlands keeps coming back in my mind, which is this beautiful place in Harvard, Mass. Everybody should go visit. It's basically, where they had a commune. I guess they're the Bronte sisters. Maybe I forget who exactly it was. The Alcott sisters and Thoreau. There's a bunch of people, transcendentalists, and they decided to give up worldly possessions and live off the land this was a financial planning decision, right?
Right.
But now it didn't last. I guess they were there about 3 years, and it turned out to be the price was too high. So, of course, as an economist, and you're an economist too, we have to have these trade-offs. We have to think about, can I really afford to take off Friday? Relative to my other, maybe I really want to take this kid to walk this kid home from school, but I want to put the other one in a private school, and I can't have both. And so I have to make the sacrifice. So, sacrifice one for the other. These are kind of Sophie Choice type questions, right?
Right.
Yeah, very difficult.
But often, when we get so many answers to the goal exercises, which is a wonderful thing, because then you can figure out which are the ones that are going to cost the least, but where they really will get this burst of energy right away from the financial plan. And that's one of the things we release by doing the goal exercises well and doing them first, is we get this additional energy. And it means that they're going to be much more productive. Their legacy is going to be much stronger. Their relationships are going to be stronger. Because you think about it, so many people I would see would come in and there would be a cloud over them that would be telling them, you can't do this and you can't do that. And sometimes you get impossible things. I had a person, you might have known them. I'm not going to mention who they were. They've passed away now, but they were in the money management world in Boston, pretty well known and quite successful. And they were a little strange. And they came in and they said, George, I want you to I can't remember exactly what it was, but when we did the third questions, it was about their 13-year-old daughter, I think, who had passed away. And they were so torn up about it. It was one of the rare occasions where I said, I think you should probably see a therapist. And I know many of them in the area, and I'm happy to refer you. And he got fierce with me. He said, you've written the book. He said, I don't want a therapist. It's like he was scared to death of that possibility. And but that was a cloud that hung over him. He'd not.
So you were turned into you were transformed into the therapist.
For a moment.
You're doing financial therapy, really, right?
Not really, because the one of the things I argue against that. There's a lot of people who do that, and I think that's not where we're trained. And we're trained to look forward into the future and
Okay.
deliver a path to an economic future, as you might call it, and I would call it their torch, their passion, their legacy. And we're trained to do that. And so therapists will look back in the past. Here, he wanted me just because I had some psychological knowledge. And what we did was very quickly, we identified that that was a cloud hanging over him. And what he really needed to do was to resolve that. And if he wasn't going to resolve that in therapy, I threw out a few ideas. He had a few ideas. He came back in the next meeting and he said, I've set up a foundation. And I wrote a long letter to my daughter. And he basically took care of it. So it was no longer something that was driving him crazy. And then we could get busy and look at what
So he
is.
had lost a daughter and he had another daughter,
Yeah.
and he decided,
Yeah.
so the foundation was for a child.
Actually, it ended up being the foundation. What really was going on was he was also in a relationship which he'd not really kind of made happen. And I think part of it was because of the feeling that he'd failed his daughter. And so he got very excited about the relationship, and that got cured. Anyway, it was kind of strange because he had a lot of money. What was he doing coming in? And he could do whatever he wanted, but he wanted to have someone who had some psychological insight help him. And I just helped him toward his goals. Where was he? Where does he really want to go? A lot of times people get stuck in therapy for years and years when if they looked at who they really want to be and just went for it, it would cure a lot that's going on.
I think one thing, that kind of comes out of this conversation is that, if you're not high income, you might think that who's got high income or is a celebrity has it made. And well, gee, that's not really the case, because they may be, so nervous to spend money that they can't enjoy it. Their relationships seem to be falling apart. They have lots of suicide, even most successful people. And I'll just give you one story that's true. I'm not going to mention the person, but it's probably somebody you know as well. But this guy was the chief economist for a major financial institution. And he told me a little bit after the dot-com bubble burst that he was bankrupt. He had gone bankrupt because he had plunged every single penny into the but he was the chief economist, right? For, an extremely well-known major financial institution. And you just had no idea. And he's very straight-laced and give all these standard talks about, the economy and being practical and so forth. And there he went off and did this. And then I remember there was another journalist who wrote for the New York Times. I forget his name, but he actually publicly admitted in a column that he had gone bankrupt by doing the same thing, by plunging. And he'd been writing personal finance columns for years, telling people how to be mature and appropriate and careful. And he personally had not saved, and also had poorly. And when you get into a situation where you haven't saved and you're over, when you're over your head, and then you start to plunge, as we saw in the dot-com bubble, the banks were basically bankrupt, and the bankers went and borrowed money at a high rate, and then started investing in risky things to try and make up, and didn't work out. And I think something like 1,500 banks went bust over 9 years. I just say this because we now have half of the FDIC insured banks, 4,300 FDIC insured banks, 2,300, if you mark them to market right now, are bankrupt.
Oh boy.
There's value their assets at market, not at book.
Wow.
They've been doing, which means that they're in a situation where they have to make money quickly or go under. So it's either they declare bankruptcy today or they do a slow, on average, they're going to go bankrupt. Now, they might be bailed out by something remarkable happens in the market, like interest rates go back to where they were overnight, really low, but we're not really seeing that. So we have, this kind of thing happening again. So we need more George Kinders out there talking to people. Let me ask you, Buddhism, mindfulness, how do they exactly enter into this?
Yeah. And
Obviously you're,
go ahead. No, go ahead. Sure.
well, I mean, obviously you're, a deep spiritual person. It comes right across, and anybody would be open to listening. But you've also kind of trained yourself into these. You haven't just kind of Mr. Nice Guy George Kinder trying to help people with your own philosophy, but you're really going out of your way to go to meetings or to go across the country to go to and then to build this Kinder Institute to train financial professionals. So you're on a mission. So my sense is that you asked yourself these questions, and that you at an early stage, and then you hopped onto your answers very quickly thereafter, and have been pursuing. So that if I had to stop and ask you these questions to yourself right now, the answer would be I would continue doing what I'm doing. So I want to see, learn a little bit more about, I think, about where Buddhism, what you learned in these other, realms of thought that kind of influenced your thinking and your training of financial professionals, how Buddhism comes into training financial mindfulness. Where's that coming? What's the added value added from these things?
Yeah. I'm going to digress just for a moment to say your story about the chief executive. I'd forgotten about that client that I mentioned to you, who was, well known in the money management world. Similar thing. He hadn't gone bankrupt, but the market had exploded for decades, and where had he been? In treasury bills the whole time. And even though he was advising people on how to use margin, he was managing mutual funds that were highly risky. Anyway, so that's why I actually suggested he see a therapist, because it seemed so out of integrity, that mix. But the Buddhism, I have to go back to my childhood again in a way. As I said, I grew up in a small town, but we lived on the edge of the town, and there were 15 acres of field around us. And so I spent a lot of time out in the, not in the woods, there were fields, and playing, and playing ball, but also, making paths through the brambles and all that. It was fun. And at the same time, my mother was very religious, and I picked up something, I don't know where, but it was mainly, I just became really curious about the nature of the mind, and the nature of consciousness, and the nature of experience, and who we are as human beings. All those things began very early for me. And so when I got to Harvard, it was, that movement, the Beatles and transcendental meditation, all that stuff was, taking off. And so I kind of experimented a bit with that. And it was very rich for me. I realized, wow, there's some extraordinary experiences you can have here. And there's a lot to learn about this world in here. So I dived in, and you wouldn't believe how many hours I've done this over the years, but I've done a huge amount daily forever. And because it worked for me, it did something for me, it meant something to me. And so part of it in the early days was just, I brought meditation in as part of the training. I think because I realized that it helped people kind of quiet down around anger, around anxiety, around all those feelings that clients would come in with. Money's passionate. People are crazy around money. So how do we as advisors model being at peace in relation to all that. It's not just being clear in our mind, but it's also being at ease. So that was intriguing for me, but I think in the early days, I didn't totally know what I was doing. But I introduced it. And what I've come to realize is that the most incredible skill that a life planner has is not the understanding of the 3 questions and the inspirational exercises. The most incredible skill that we train our life planners to have is a quality of great listening, because that's really where the client begins to trust you. If you really listen to them and you clearly get who they are, what they care about, and you're able to share that by the depth of your listening, by your ease or whatever, then that's an incredible skill to have. So what I've come to realize is that mindfulness, where the most simple form of mindfulness, I'm sure you know, it's just going back to the breath and feeling sensations, usually at the nostrils or at the belly, though there are many varieties of meditation. But in every time you go to it, you're strengthening your focus. Every time you return, you're strengthening your focus. But how you're strengthening your focus is that you're letting go of your own anger, frustration, annoyance, whatever comes up that distracts you, desire, whatever's coming up, you let go of it and you come back and you focus. So what's slowly happening and what develops over time is you become more and more emotionally intelligent, meaning that you're not driven by those feelings. And you become a better and better listener because you're not distracted by your own stories, because you can be right there. So I learned that it was just a great, I wrote a book that the subtitle, I think you mentioned it, is called Inner Listening. And that's really what I think, how I think of it, not in the deepest way, but in a way that is very relevant for financial advisors. And for us, if we're in a relationship or if we're parents, it's a great thing in all these ways.
So let me ask you, so getting people to this kind of common place of giving away or giving up, fixating on their own background and lives and problems and health status and so forth, that's kind of part of the goal here, and then they can come back to really look at what their situation is from a more neutral position. But to what extent, through this process, you've been collecting data, in effect, I think, which is, and I'm curious about the data you've collected. I mean, to what extent does, this person you're referencing who was, a top exec, but he was just investing in treasuries or T-bills and consequently was probably kicking himself, very, very angry with himself because he thought he had, and then you've got other people who went the other way, and you've got, to what extent is all this kind of due to childhood experiences, upbringing? To what extent is it due to, do you think, just our genetic foundation of our psychology, our minds, some of us being more fearful than others? And is there a way to tell that those people that you haven't actually done the wrong thing, that you've done the right thing? Because
Right.
the other way would have been terrorizing for you, and this has kept you safe. And you could have, there are other states of the world where you took that path that was terrifying and you actually fell off the cliff. Right? I have a friend who's just, I'll tell you, a friend who's is a movie writer, script writer, and screenwriter, and he is a very nervous guy, and he knows he's a very nervous guy, and but he's always kicking himself for having invested in basically safe assets, and now he has a fair amount of money, but he's still kicking himself. He's still upset. He doesn't realize that he's really, fully taken care of. He's already answered your first question. He's got enough to live on, especially the way he lives,
Right.
but he's still consumed by this regret. And I said, well, look, if you're from an economics perspective, we go back to when you're younger. He's not like 65. We go back to when you're 30. You're taking this career. We've got all this labor income risk. You need to have something safe in your portfolio, your larger portfolio of resources. And so you did exactly what the economist would have said to do. I think that helped a bit until the next day, but
well, that's very good advice. And of course, you would come up with that, Larry. And I'm pleased to hear the story. And with the fellow that I was talking about who'd been in Treasury bills, there was an element of that too that I also would give him. Hey, man, you're so risky in what you're doing with your career and everything. That there's some sense in what you did. But I don't train the consumer so much. I mean, I do. I'm also a Buddhist teacher. I'm a meditation teacher. I've taught for 35 years and led 10-day retreats multiple times a year for many, many years. So that's a very deep part of myself. But I never laid that on any client that ever came to see me. With the financial advisors, I've trained them in meditation, and usually on a 4 or 5 day training, they do 20 or 30 minutes a day of that meditation, and they get interested enough that usually they want to pursue it, and we'll find avenues for them to do it if they do. So I train the advisors because the advisor being peaceful in relation to the client's jitteriness is a meditation in and of itself for the client, and it's a wonderful thing. And so your question about to what extent it's childhood or DNA, and I think both those things obviously can play out. I just go with, who do you want to be, and how can we get you there, and what would it be like if you lived there? Really feel what that is. We try to craft something
think about the future.
Yeah.
And
within reason, within economic reason, always within economic reason.
Because we can't change the past in any case, so why in some sense dwell on it? But how much diversity are you finding in people's answers to these questions? I mean, do you have some people that or do they all kind of have the same, when they really think about it, come down to the same thing? Or I mean, obviously there's, some people want to play guitar and some people want to go off sailing, but is it mostly that they are happy with what they've been doing, or that they really do want to change? We have a bunch of happy people, happy people out there, or unhappy?
It's it's a great question, and I'm sure you're as fascinated with the studies of happiness as I am, looking at them and questioning their accuracy and all of that.
By the way, the Danes are supposed to be the happiest. And I don't know what your background is, whether you're Danish, but everybody in Denmark knows that they score the highest on the happiness question. So every year when the happiness question is asked in Denmark, they obviously, because of national pride, they want to say they're happy. So you can't tell them anything. Yeah.
I haven't heard that one before. That's great.
Yeah.
Cool. It's kind of a mix, I mean, the surveys, and for the most part, the surveys say that we say most people, like 70%, we're 70% happy or something like that, that most people. What I found is that virtually everybody has something that they haven't fulfilled. Virtually everybody. And it could be a very small thing. It could be something that just arose. In my third question, now my second question's become in some way more important, partly because of my age and what I've done. But in my third question, it suddenly shifted to something never been there before. It's very incidental, really, in a way. But it was just something. Well, my family and I have traveled to Cornwall in the summer periodically, and we love it. And I fell in love with it this last time so much that it appeared in my third question as the only answer. And that's not what's been there. Been there in the past, but the last few years, because of COVID and concerns about my own health. I mean, not serious. I don't have any serious illness, but with those concerns, I really passionately pursued what was in that third question, which was, I call them illuminated manuscripts, these books of poetry and photography that are, I think, are quite beautiful if you see them, and also meaningful about mindfulness and mindfulness in nature. So but this question, I'm now roaming kind of far around your series of questions. The question about happiness, what's beautiful about the questions is it reveals whatever is there that hasn't yet been fulfilled. Usually there's something. It might be, gosh, my sister, we had this argument like 17 years ago, and we've never quite worked it out. And I know she's not so well. There you go, right there. When you ask if they're so we get them on that. So if and we don't go back in the past and look at why it happened and all that, we just go, well, what can you do? Let's do something. Let's make it happen. So that's really rewarding. What was the other question about DNA? And
I was just wondering whether there's lots of variation.
Variability, right?
Yeah.
So I was an oddball on these things because almost everybody puts down family, and I once, I've got many people who've trained with me and are trainers. So I've got train the trainers and this group of people. And one time I sat in on a workshop by one of my trainers, and he was giving everybody the 3 questions, and I did my version of it, and everybody had family in that third question, and I didn't. And mine was way out there about, spiritual experience or art or something like that. And he said, well, there's one like him in every crowd or something like that. So mine was off, and so you have some that are off, they're just different. And I was different for a while. When my kids were born, everything shifted, and suddenly I wanted to have more time with them. So there are similarities, but you can't really quite predict. We're so idiosyncratic. We have had unique childhoods. We've had unique upbringings. We've developed unique skills. We've discovered things that we're passionate about at different times in our lives that are slightly different. One of my children right now is passionate about cold weather and being in places that are cold. She wants to be in Iceland. She wants to go to Antarctica. It's like, where did this come from? And wonderful. I want to support her. That's one of the fun things about being a life planner is you see these quirky things come up and you go, oh, cool. Let's make it happen.
That's cool. I mean, the entire, so one of the things, I'm not sure how much, about my kind of angle on financial planning, which is economics based. And it's kind of, I call it reality based as opposed to pie in the sky.
Right.
And, so maybe we could close by having a little discussion about how you would react to I've been kind of ranting against goals because I think people said, asked by financial planners, what's your goal? How much do you want to spend in retirement? And of course, an economist's answer to that would be $1 billion a day because there's no budget constraint connected to it. And so our software for my company, Maxify Planner, we have a tool, it starts out with your resources and says, okay, let's go back and be Irving Fisher in 1920. You've figured out how to economics of saving and consumption, and you've got these lifetime resources, and your goal is to be like a squirrel and be able to consume acorns in the winter. So in the winter, your winter is retirement. So you want to spend the same amount. So how much you need to save, how much can you spend today so you can keep on spending it? That's basically the question our software solves for. Whereas the traditional method is, let's figure out what your goal is. It's usually set way too high, because why not? And then they might pull it back down, the planner might pull it back down. But basically they then say, well, let's put you into riskier assets to meet your goal. And you've got an 80% chance of making your goal, and that's safe. And I don't think that's safe at all. 20% chance of going from, an 85 starving. I mean, it's ridiculous to call that safe. But a lot of most financial planners don't know that this methodology's got problems, and they adjust their advice that way. But here in our conversation, you're kind of, changing my thinking a bit, because you're really saying the goals come first. At some fundamental level, you have to think about, do you want to really retire at 62 and live a lower lifestyle? Maybe that is your desire, and you need to think that through. And then we maybe go to economics-based planning to live within that lifestyle, within that resource budget constraint. And then, the other problem with the traditional methodologies, it's inducing people to do sales jobs, selling and getting commissions on products, which is something you've been opposed to your whole life, and a big player in APFA, as I understand. So has that kind of so what's your reaction to all this meandering of mine?
Yeah, I didn't know that I would be as close to you in this as I am, but it's wonderful hearing your comments and how you're thinking and how you've developed that thinking. Where the problem arises that I'm hearing, and I do want to say I want to go a little bit towards civilization just as we close, so we can share my wild, crazy ideas there as well, briefly. But the goals that you're referring to by these so-called financial advisors or financial planners, they don't sound like fiduciaries to me, because they aren't really putting the client first, they're putting the money first. And so the goals that they are asking about and that you're reflecting on are financial goals. They're asking, how much money do you need? What do they know? And moreover, you're coming back. So you've got a financial advisor who is traditionally untrustworthy and not trusted. And even if you kind of trust them, you still got a little bit of a, well, I don't know about this guy. And they're supposed to know money. So of course you do what you say. $1 billion ought to do it, whatever it is. And and then the advisor has to talk them down. And it's like, what game are we playing here? This isn't real. This isn't about the client and who they really are. And so the thing that I really like about what you're saying is, wait a minute, we've got a base here of what the resources are. And that's a place that I've always gone to as a base. But the goal thing that is inappropriate there is you want to find out what the real goals are. What do they care about? What are they passionate about? What would be the legacy? And those goals are the kind of goals you and I have been talking about. They don't cost a lot usually. Sometimes they take a few years extra work. They don't cost a lot usually. Not the real goals, not what they really want. And
the price is negative. Maybe it's giving up stuff that you really don't want.
Exactly. That's where it comes back to, when you come down to the resources. I mean, what we've done in our retirement, semi-retirement, whatever you call it, I know that there's a basis there. And by the way, my wife, she was a businesswoman, although she was an actress and all, and she insisted we go to a financial planner because, I was dominating the answers there. And all right, we'll go. And it was very valuable, really, for both of us, and made sure that the economic thinking was similar. But we have a base of our Social Security and of kind of certain assets that we have that are really really secure, and we feel comfortable with the possibility that we fall back practically to that base. And in the meantime, we've got college kids' education still to go, and we would love to live, more out there. And so we take some risks now because there's still some flexibility, and there's flexibility in our assets. But without that base, without knowing what that base is and kind of being comfortable there, you're playing games, and you're playing Russian roulette to some extent, and yeah. So
Yeah, I was going to
yeah.
say we introduced, so this might be of interest. Sometimes I feel bad because in these podcasts I'm talking about our software. I feel like I'm selling our software, but on the other hand, it's an opportunity for people to kind of think about how do you achieve a base. So one way you could achieve a base, which our software implements in one of the way it runs, is called upside investing, where you just say, okay, I'm going to take a set of assets, put it on the market, not spend out of them until some point, but everything else is going to go into tips, and tips, long-term tips right now are yielding pretty high return. So that's a way to develop a floor to your living standard. And software says, okay, if you put this much in the market, then here's your floor. If you put more in the market, your floor is going to be lower. You get to see that trade-off. So just those two things, tips and stocks, you can have a floor. And then with the stocks, you're saying, okay, you tell the program, I'm going to start withdrawing in 10 years or 15 years or whatever point, and then stop withdrawing. And then whenever you withdraw, you put it into tips with the withdrawals, and then you can raise your floor. Yeah. So now you have a living standard floor, a really base one, but then the floor keeps going up if the stocks materialize. That's what we show the Monte Carlo. So now we have a methodology out there, a way to actually implement, I think, what you're saying we want people to do, to have this security underneath their retirements. Yeah. So they know they never have to drop, because I don't think people will want to see the living standard drop in retirement. It's too big of a psychological blow.
Right on. I love it. I love what you're describing. I haven't done financial planning or portfolio, my own portfolio construction really in 20 years. And you're reminding me back to the beginning when tips were just beginning, and I was passionate. I loved what they were doing and how they were doing it. And because one of the major risks is inflation, but and the people that we went to have to manage, it was one of the areas where we didn't fully agree. And so I've missed that. And I hear you and I go, yay, Larry, well done. Good on you. No, I think we're very close in our agreement. And the thing that I would add would be, stay away from the financial goal, go to what the real goals are. And then the other thing is you try to really inspire the person to have those goals, those real goals, as quickly as possible, because that adds tremendous energy to every aspect of their life, including their economic life, their work life. So that's the one wrinkle. But I do want to go to civilization. Do we have time?
Yeah. Please tell us. Yes.
Yeah. I know that you could ask a skeptical question about it, because it's I'm, as we all are, I think, profoundly disturbed by some of the direction that the economy, not the economy, but the world is going in.
Right.
And so I've been, taking that economic thinking. One of the things I had a lot of fun doing, and you would have done it naturally as an economist, but for about 15 years, every time a new Nobel Prize would come out, I would go and study the person's work. Okay. So that was, I was doing money management and all the rest, but gosh, I was fascinated. What's going on? Maybe it was 20 years I would do that. And it was a lot of fun, just to challenge myself intellectually, to be there and go toe to toe. But I didn't have your kind of training. I didn't have a PhD, but I had a decent background. But so I've been troubled by, the polarization of media, the polarization in politics. I've been troubled by the concern that many people have about the planet, about Earth, and knowing there are creative solutions to some of these things, but seeing like AI come up now, and suddenly people are terrified again. And at first they go, "Oh, look at all these great things," and then they go, "Oh my golly, look at what the scoundrels could do to us with it." And what I did, I challenged myself. I said, there must be something at the base of our market economy. I'm a huge believer in markets. I love markets, but there must be something at the base of that is causing this bifurcation to occur, this polarization to occur. And what could it be? And before that, I actually thought, life planning works so beautifully for clients. I bet it would work for civilization. So I wrote this book called A Golden Civilization and the Map of Mindfulness. The Map of Mindfulness is really interesting in terms of time and space. But the Golden Civilization, I went on a kind of a world tour, and I gave talks in China, I gave talks in Japan, I gave talks in India, I gave talks across Europe, and not talks, I did workshops where I asked people, what would be an ideal civilization? What would be a golden civilization? And what was interesting, Larry, even in China, people said democracy. Now, of course, I was in Hong Kong, but democracy was a huge theme wherever I went. Kindness was a huge theme wherever I went. The end of corruption was a huge theme wherever I went. And you would, all the problems of the earth you would see come up and say, we shouldn't have this in a golden civilization. So as I said, that was intriguing. So everybody has the same vision. In life planning, if you've got a vision, you inspire people to live by it, and then you figure out how to solve it. So I thought, that's, we should do this. And so that's, one of the things I'm playing with in my old age. And but the other thing, one of the things, as I said, I thought right at the basis, I've read Adam Smith and love the free market economy, but I came to realize that a lot of the ones who wanted free markets were people who already dominated the market, and that wasn't exactly free. And so I went back and I thought, well, how does all this happen? And I think you've had people on who've talked about, let's limit the amount that banks can lend in a sensible way. And there are solutions like that when you look at the leveraging that occurs in our society. But what I realized was that when we set up those corporations, including nonprofits at the very beginning, we give them all these freedoms, regulatory freedoms, tax freedoms, and we don't ask any obligation back to us, to society. So they are not required to be humane. Why should we expect them to be humane in everything they do? They may innovate dramatically, beautiful, incredible stuff for us. But of course, they're not going to be humane in all of their decisions. So my thought was, and you'll see it on my website, I've got a fiduciary section on it where I go, we should have fiduciary in all things. And every corporation should be required to be a fiduciary in all things, to democracy, to the planet, to truth. And if we had that requirement, would we have any of the problems we have now? And so that's my wild idea. And I'm about to launch something because I think I've got a symbol for it. You'll see the symbol on there that I think could go viral, the symbol. It's the planet Earth and fiduciary written around it. And, again, my notion is, how do we inspire a vision? Because realistically, you go, George, you'll never get there. But if we inspire a strong enough vision, as Gandhi did, as Mandela did, as Martin Luther King did, if we inspire a strong enough vision, something can happen. So that's where I am.
Ideas change the world, and George Kinder is full of ideas, full of great ideas, and deep and heartfelt and humane ideas. You are changing the world. You're going to continue to, and we're going to be in closer touch going forward, very close touch.
Beautiful. Thank you, Larry. Yeah.